cloud. Okay.
I'll also do a recording, Allison. You know, a tape recording.
You can record it right on Zoom, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. But, and then I can just upload it to the YouTube channel later so that people can get it.
Can somebody tell me what date she sent? Beth, you sent the
Friday,
the packet is on Friday?
Yeah,
Friday around 3 o'clock.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
maybe Wendy would benefit from the same thing that
Yeah, maybe.
Adam just did, because
Maybe.
it could be a losing battle otherwise.
Maybe.
Here, I'll just,
Just send it to her.
yeah. Um, okay. I just resent it to you, Wendy.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm using my iPad for that and my computer for this, so
All right. Are we recording now?
Reference.
Allison?
reference everything.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, let's call to order the board meeting for Midco Solid Waste Corporation on May 27th, 2020, and open our agenda with the first item, which is any public or director comments from anybody that wants to have any input on this item. Is there anybody has anything they want to add? And I don't see any hands or faces, so we'll move on to our second item, which is, and we're very thankful to have our representatives from Camden National Bank here tonight to be discussing our investments in general. And I would request respectfully for you each to introduce yourselves, and I will turn this item over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us. My name's Audrey Klein Leach, and I'm a senior trust officer with Camden National Wealth Management. And also on the line is Patrick White Thompson, who is the portfolio manager on the account. Your account also has a third person who is a vital part of the relationship, and her name is Ling Ling Ohm, and she is the administrator on the account. And she's based in Portland, and she's not on the call tonight, but Patrick and I are. And we really want to thank you for the opportunity to touch base and kind of hear how things are going with you, and to share just kind of a brief overview of the investments and how they're doing. Just to kind of recap, you folks went out to an RFP, and we were very grateful that you decided to work with Camden National Wealth Management. When we were in initial discussions with you folks, you guys were thinking kind of about two pots of money. The money that we currently have, which ultimately will be used to cap the dump, for lack of a better word, landfill, thank you. And then you were also thinking about another account which would be more long-term, almost like an endowment that would take care of ongoing expenses related to the maintenance of that capped landfill. So the funds, but that has not been, that second part, that endowment part has not been funded yet. And the thought was that those funds would be invested a little more broadly, probably in some portion of equities, as well as fixed income and cash. So this account, since it's not needed next week, but will be needed, it has a shorter time frame, and also because of the nature of where the funds originated, you are kind of following the municipal standards, and it's in fixed income instruments, which Patrick can go over more fully. The other thing that we talked about when we were in that whole RFP process as well, which I just wanted to remind you folks is available to you, is my understanding is that each one of the towns has some funds kind of set aside related to Midco solid waste. And what we can offer, if it's of interest to you folks, is we can do what's called sub-accounting, which means if you brought those funds under the Camden National Wealth Management umbrella, we could keep a separate line item for Camden's versus Hope's versus Lincolnville's. So you could see that your funds were there and separate, and it would make for very easy reporting and transparency. So I just wanted to remind you folks that that option is available should you want to avail yourselves of it. So Patrick has put together a short presentation, not as in-depth as we go into with the Finance Committee. Certainly, if you want to delve into anything, we can do that or come back for a fuller presentation, but we wanted just to kind of give a brief overview. Patrick?
Yeah, so I'm the portfolio manager, and I've gotten a chance to speak with you on a few different occasions with some of you guys in the past. And to Audrey's point, the packet that I put together, I wanted to slim it down. I know it's 6:45 right now, and I have some tacos that are getting cold here. So, you know, I want to be respectful of your time. But again, we are a resource to you. So if you have any immediate questions right now just on what markets are doing and, you know, what our prognosis is, I'd be happy to field those, you know, at any time. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to be focusing just on the fixed income markets because that's primarily what we're invested in. Give you guys an overview of really what's going on, and then you know, how we're going to be positioning the account going forward. So I started out my presentation. It didn't make the cut. I actually sent it at the very last minute to Alice, and I had a little cartoon, and it's these two old people, and they're talking to each other, and one says to the other, "Remember when we used to live in precedented times?" And I think that really speaks to kind of what we're doing here. You know, I haven't had a haircut in 2.5 months, so you know, it's I'm working in my pajama bottoms, and we're doing a heck of a job. But you know, everything that we are seeing in the markets and the economy, just haven't seen anything like this in my lifetime. Haven't seen anything like this in, you know, the gray hairs lifetime, the older people in our office. So you know, what we're seeing is, and I'm going to start up with the presentation if you guys have it. I'm turning to page 2.
Share your screen, or do you want me to pull it up and I'll share my screen?
Yeah, or yeah, that would be great. I'm not quite sure how to do that on Zoom. That would be perfect.
Did we get that?
I sent it in an email just right before the meeting, basically. Let's see here, but I'll pull it up.
Oh, perfect, yeah.
And let's see. Just gonna get over to here and full screen. And make it a little bigger.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And yeah. So can tell me when to.
Yep. So page 2. This is just the federal funds rate. So you know, when we're constructing bond portfolios, the activities of the Fed have a very big impact on interest rates in general, and that's the Fed funds rate is the very front end of the yield curve. So the short-term interest rate benchmark. And what we've seen, if you look at that chart there from 2019, we actually we had a pretty decent cash rate. I think when this account was opened, our money market rate was yielding about 1.6%. Since the Fed dropped interest rates by a whole percentage point, and not even during meeting, it was out of cycle. So it was very unprecedented what they decided to do in order to stimulate the economy. We're now looking at interest rates on our money market account of about 25 basis points, which is 0.25%. So, you know, cash was actually a productive part of people's portfolios. It's really difficult to justify being heavily in cash at this stage. And we don't see the Fed funds rate going anywhere anytime soon. In addition to that, in the box in the middle there of the chart, just talks a little bit about what the Fed's been doing other than lowering the interest rates, which has been to be on an extremely aggressive bond buying campaign to inject liquidity. So they've been buying treasuries, they've been buying mortgages, they've been buying investment grade bonds, they've even been buying high yield bonds in order to kind of stimulate the economy. And then on the other side, we have the fiscal stimulus that was passed by Congress, which includes the $1,200 stimulus check, and all of these other things, subsidies for the airline industry, et cetera, comes out to about $4 trillion. And that is in direct response to the coronavirus and trying to kickstart the economy with a huge liquidity injection. So what we've seen is on the stock side is we've seen markets recover based on this liquidity injection, despite the fact that the economy is still very shaky. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. We have a 15% unemployment rate currently. There's something like 36 million people out of work right now. So, those things are going to improve over time, but we're really looking at a situation where the economy is going to take some time to get back on the ground. So from a stock perspective, we're still we're cautious about where the markets are at right now. From a bond perspective, it's very tricky because bond yields have not risen with stock prices, which typically is the case. And what that's telling us is that people that are buying bonds are still skeptical about the economic recovery. So if we go to the next page, page 3, and I'm just putting this in here. I put this slide in here just to kind of paint the picture of what we're dealing with and the challenges that we're facing for fixed income. This is the income earned on $100,000 in a savings account and a money market account. So the two pillars there, the dark one is the money market account, and then the gray one is the savings account. And if you look at 2019, the blue line there is what the income needed to beat inflation. And as you can see in 2019, just about where you would just about make inflation or be able to at least keep up with inflation if you just held on to money market funds. Our current situation now in 2020 is we're making a fraction of the interest off of our money market funds. So that's the challenge on the front end. If we go to the next slide, this is on page 4. So these are the default rates. This is the high yield market. So this is credit risk. So your portfolio has a combination of corporate bonds, government agencies, and U.S. Treasuries. And so the U.S. Treasuries are paying very little. I just did some shopping for this account. I was looking at a 3-year Treasury. I had to actually pull that order because it was paying less than the current money market rates. It was paying about 0.22% to hold a bond for 3 years. So the quality is not paying well, but the other thing is that default rates have gone up. And so what we've been doing with all of our portfolios is we've really been ratcheting up our quality. We've introduced some new research products to really drill down on what we're invested in on the corporate side to make sure that our credits are credit worthy. The good thing about working with a municipal format like you have is that we have to focus on the highest quality bonds. So the bonds that we currently have are of the highest quality. They're A-rated. So we feel pretty comfortable about that at this point. But if things change for any of those companies that we hold, we will sell those, and we are reviewing those on an ongoing basis. So I put that in there just to also illustrate that as we're trying to make this account productive, we also have to be very cognizant of the credit risks and the potential for defaults just based on what we're seeing in the greater economy. On the next page, This is basically speaking, so what happened was we had a very large maturity come due. So when I go through the internals of the accounts, you're going to notice that we are in a big cash position right now because we had a treasury bond mature on May 15th, and we've been kind of searching for a best case scenario for what to do with those funds. And this exhibit here shows what you can expect from a treasury for the 2, 3, 5, 10-year, and 30-year rates. And this was pulled from this morning's this morning's internal research piece. And then if you look in the corner, if you look in the category next to treasuries, that's the agencies. So these are government agencies like the Farm Credit Bureau. These are they don't have the explicit guarantee of the U.S. government, but they have the implicit guarantee. So they are for all intents and purposes as safe as any other government investment. But you do pick up a little additional yield by investing in agencies. So if you can see there on that chart, the agencies in the circled area that I had circled there for the 3 and 5 years, you're able to pick up a little bit of extra spread there, and that is going to be where we're going to be utilizing those funds going forward. And in addition to that, we are investing in agencies that are callable. So the agencies that we are buying for your portfolio with that maturity, with those proceeds from the maturity, are callable within 1 year. But as compensation for that callability, we're getting paid an additional premium. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we've had to do in order to find any incremental yield, which is, looking at agencies, looking at ways that, potentially if we buy a callable bond and it's called away in a year, we think that's still a risk we're willing to take for another 10 to 15 basis points, just because everything is so lean out there in the markets. Do you guys have any questions at this point?
Is this the end of the presentation discussion?
Yep, it is. So if you have any questions, this is a great time because I'm going to just go over performance and just run through our, just the holdings.
Well, probably we should do that.
Okay.
So it's not the end of the presentation, it's just the end of that slide, right?
Yeah. I have our performance.
Okay.
And then, so for on the next page,
Right.
This is a breakdown of the account. As you can see, we have $385,000 in cash. $200,000 was a maturity, and we did have some cash left over from a previous maturity. So we will be implementing those funds in the agencies that I just described.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go to the, let me see, if you go to page, I'm kind of skipping ahead here a little bit. The next couple pages are just the breakdown of the account. So as you can see on the corporate bonds in the top there, if you there you go, thank you. You can see the handful of corporate bonds that we have. Those are all A-rated: Apple, Coca-Cola, IBM, Oracle. We are required to maintain an A-rated or better, and that is listed on our IPS. And then we have government securities. These are the U.S. Treasuries, and then we have the agencies below that. So I'm going to jump to page.
That's required. That's required. You mean an IPS is the investment policy statement, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you, Allison, for clarifying that.
I know that I have trouble a little bit in the finance committee briefings that we have with you. I have trouble keeping up and understanding what you're talking about, and
yeah, absolutely. I apologize. We when we're talking with each other, the IPS, all these acronyms just kind of flow off our tongues. The investment policy statement, which is the compact that we have originally constructed for you, it takes into account the time frame, which I think we originally agreed was 7 or 8 years. Different tax implications if that's the case. Whatever the constraints of the account and how the account needs to be managed, it's written in a document that we have on file, and we review that document regularly with our clients to make sure that it's still in line. But our account here, our objectives here are pretty clear. You know, we're trying to manage these funds so that they will be available over a specific time frame, which is, from my understanding, under 10 years. So that's kind of sort of frames the structure of how we're putting the portfolio together.
And we did
Yeah, go ahead.
We did that investment policy statement. It was mostly the finance committee, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. It was us just saying, let's just do the most conservative thing that guarantees everything, because some feel a little uncomfortable, and it may be that there are opportunities where our, and I think we should find out at some point, where figure out where our investment policy statement might be more conservative than what the law requires. Not that that would mean we would automatically jump to do some, you know, as risky as the law allows, but it would be good for us to know that at some point.
Yeah, it's a really it's kind of a funny the statutes that govern you know, municipal portfolios, and these are portfolios where the funds are directly coming from, you know, tax revenue sources or from towns, etc. They do stress quality, but there are some odd loopholes. There's a loophole, I believe, that you can invest in utility stocks as one sort of esoteric you know, subset that you can invest in. All the portfolios that I've seen that have been managed according to this statute don't get involved with any of those funny you know, side areas. It's usually just very typical, plain vanilla, especially when you're dealing with a maturity date that really kind of falls within that 10-year range. When we're looking at investments, anything under 10 years is shorter term in nature. You know, when we're thinking of long-term investment portfolios, you know, we're thinking of multi-generations, you know, things of that nature, very open-ended stuff. And that's why endowments, and to Audrey's point, that's why endowments typically have a looser mandate where they can invest in equities, because they're looking for growth that's almost in perpetuity. This portfolio is very different from that particular perspective, and that's kind of why we have these particular securities in place. Does that clarify that for you guys?
Yeah, it does. Just a curiosity, these numbers we're looking at on this page, the gain losses, as what are those? What date are those as of?
Yeah, that's a great question. Those dates are as of yesterday. I ran, or as of today, I actually ran that today. So those are yesterday's gain loss, and that's a great question because those are transient gains. The reason that we're seeing gains show up is because interest rates have fallen so low. So the way that bonds work, they pay a fixed coupon, and the value of the bond is sort of like a teeter-totter. So when interest rates go down, the value of the bonds that pay a higher rate go up.
Right.
In consequence. But what we're planning to do with this portfolio is we're planning to hold these bonds until maturity. So those gains will ultimately go back to zero because we paid you know,
Right.
we pay,
Well,
they will mature at par. So so those gains are based on the current interest rate environment. If we sold all these bonds, we would be able to realize those gains, but just based on the way that we're managing this account, we're going to hold those and continue to maintain those income streams until they mature.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's a very important distinction, because I don't want anybody looking at the yields and thinking we're making those percentages on these marketable securities right now. We're not. We're making on the first one, corporate bond, a gain of $1,700 on a market value of $81,000, which is, you know, whatever it is by calculation, it's way less than the yield, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right,
So yeah, so that kind of answers that. That's a great question. That's kind of that's one of the little idiosyncrasies of the bond world. I'm going to jump to the next. I'm going to jump to page 9, actually. This just kind of shows your maturity profile, what we can expect. So we have some more maturities coming due in this year. We have 160,000, and then we've kind of staggered out the maturities further out. And what we're targeting again for the reinvestment of those proceeds is the 23 and 24 maturity. So we're going to start. This is a bond ladder, and as each year matures, we are just basically extending the bond ladder out as we go, and we're maintaining a relatively short maturity profile for the account, just because interest rates are so low right now, and you're just not getting paid to go any further out on the yield curve than just a few years. And I have to think that 10 years from now, interest rates are probably going to be higher. I mean, I hope they are, because interest rates right now are basically signaling a recessionary environment. So we don't want to go out too far to grab just a few extra basis points and then potentially have our principal eroded over that time frame. If you go to the next page, so that the page 10 just highlights that we've had some things mature, we've reinvested some things. We had the maturity, the most recent maturity being the $200,000 in May. And if you go to page 11, this is the performance. So we've been working on this portfolio for about a year. We did have a phasing in process, which I spoke to the finance committee about in some detail. So for the rest of you, typically when we get our accounts, we don't inject all of the money into one day's market. We like to stagger it so we can lower the volatility over time and be opportunistic. So we've been investing this account over the last over the first 3 to 5 months that we had opened it. And so we're operating with a high cash balance in the very beginning, and that does have an effect on the longer term performance numbers, because this account is just being seasoned. So going forward, the performance numbers are going to look similar to the index, but I would also make the point that the index carries a higher duration, which is higher maturities. So that the index, our portfolio is geared towards a 7 to 10 year maturity profile. The index portfolio has 20-year maturities, 30-year maturities. So it's not a true apples to apples comparison, but we do put that in there just so you can kind of get a guideline of the greater bond markets and what they're doing. Actually, our performance since inception has been pretty good. We've been able to get 4.29% over time for the fund, and then the breakdowns of the fixed income part of the portfolio has been about 4.7%, and then the cash equivalents has been just under 1%. And then if you go to the next page, this is just a dollars and cents breakdown of the account. So we started with 0, then we got an injection of cash contributions of about 1.6 million, withdrawals, which are probably for fees there, of 3,600. The income earned was 37,000 over the time frame. The gains that we had over that time frame were 32,000. So the total earnings to the portfolio since it's been incepted has been about $70,000.
And that's what percentage did you say?
That's 4.29%.
And I thought we weren't going to do that well. Were we expecting to do that well? I thought we were going to be like 2%, 3%. Or...
Well, that's taking into account a really unprecedented interest rate environment where we've had interest rates go to 0 on the front end, and we've had longer term interest rates fall precipitously. So that does show that the that, you know, a part of that is the gains. And I'm going to rewind really quickly and go back to the, I'm going to go back to page 6, if you don't mind, Allison,
Sure.
just to show you.
I understand it and then I lose it again. Like, why is it that?
Yeah. No, that's part of the gains. That's part of the gains that we were talking about. But I think you know, a lot of those gains ultimately will go to zero as the bonds mature. So I think a better way of looking at what you could probably expect for this portfolio is the portfolio yield, which we will find on page 6.
Sorry,
That's okay.
let's see the page numbers.
Take your time.
Oh, it's because
It's two more from there.
I can't. There we go. Okay, I have to move the. There we go.
It's the next page.
All right.
Okay, so if you, and it's kind of, if you can minimize our, is there a way you can minimize our, I'm going to minimize.
Control. You're in each individual.
Oh, okay, I got you. Okay, so I minimized that. So I don't know if you can see this here, but there's on the right-hand side are the account statistics. And if you look down, the estimated annual income is about $30,000. And then if you look below that, your estimated portfolio yield is about 1.8%.
Okay.
So in answer to your question, over the long term, so in between these maturities, we're going to see the value of the bonds go up and down. Because interest rates have dropped so much, the value of our current bonds have gone up over that, you know, intra time frame. But what we can expect for the overall yield of this account is, and 1.82% is a little low, but I would say, you know, conservatively, we can expect between 1.8% and 2.2% yield, which would be sort of the overall return to the portfolio if we, you know, as we hold everything to maturity, and then eventually 7 years, you know, down the road, or 8 years down the road, the money is returned, and then all the interest is collected as well.
Right.
Hold on. So can you help me understand why, if we're at 4 point whatever percent right now, we're not why we're saying, but we're just going to continue on and wait until it goes down to 1.82% or whatever. Like, why
Well,
not?
the problem is that if we sold all the bonds now, we wouldn't be able. We'd have to go into the market, and we'd have to try to find something that could you know, we would be able to harvest those gains, but then there's a real reinvestment risk, because, you know, the coupons that we got when we first opened this account are not the same as what we're receiving now. So that's why we're continuing to hold those to maturity, so we can get that cash flow, and then as they mature, continue to reinvest in the fund. So the percent that we're seeing over the short term, it is a little misleading, because that kind of assumes that at the end of the year, you're actually selling all your assets in order to realize that. So I think the best way to look at it is if you strip out that capital gains part, and we don't want to, we're not managing this portfolio to be bond traders and to you know, to try and get cute with interest rates, et cetera. We're just trying to manage this account to preserve capital and try to enhance as much yield as we can without taking any undue risk. So if we strip out that short-term capital gains component, then what the portfolio is really delivering is something along the lines of 2%.
But that whole strategy you just mentioned about the not selling at the end of the day and not playing the interest, that's totally a function of the conservatism of the IPS. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
And that's the root you have to understand is there is a strategy that could be slightly different if our IPS were a little bit more fluid, where you could take advantage, because the 4-point-something% is based on the current market value, correct?
Yes.
All right. And if we sold at market value, then you have to do something with that monies to fund. And the difference is, that's not the intent of the IPS being conservative. It's to hold these assets until maturity, in which time you receive the 1.82%.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
What's the risk? What risk is there to selling it early and just letting it?
Exactly what Patrick was saying. So take, for example, like the IBM corporate bond that is currently paying you 3.4%. That's a very nice interest rate. And you have a little bit of a gain in it. So if you said, Patrick, sell that, the problem is if he went out, as he was saying to you before, if he went out to the market to try to find something, whether it's a treasury or an agency or another corporate bond, he wouldn't come close to 3.4%. So the strategy is, let's continue to collect that 3.4%, that income stream. And then when it comes due in November, hopefully things will have stabilized a little bit, and hopefully.
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one because that's one that's coming due. But if you look at the Qualcomm, I mean Qualcomm is another example. You have a larger gain in it, but what you would be giving up for those 2 years is $2,400 of income, and it would be very difficult to find a corporate bond right now that pays even close to 3%. And even if you did find a bond that paid a 3% coupon, you would have to pay a very high premium for it. So that's the risk that you run when you're putting together bond portfolios. We put this ladder together not knowing what interest rates would hold in the future. We just were putting together something that had a utility for this portfolio, but also was adhered to what our best thinking is, which is you don't really get compensated for investing in the long term. Now, if we had just bought 10-year bonds or 10-year Oracle bonds, that would have been fine, and we would have had those income streams over 10 years. But we just didn't know that interest rates were going to do what they're going to do. So that really guides the structure of this portfolio. Is really it's a conservative portfolio, as the policy says, and the IPS dictates that we manage in this way, because we don't want to sell now and realize a couple percentage points and then be at risk of having that yield plummet because interest rates are so low right now.
Right.
And there's no way we can lose, basically no way that we can lose money with this approach, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, the only way that we could possibly lose money, and I say this with full disclosure because there is a very small amount of the portfolio that's subjected to credit risk. So let's take Apple as an example. Do we think that Apple's going to go? We have an Apple bond here, pays 1.5%. It's due in 2021. Do we think Apple's going to go out of business in the next 2 years or next year? Probably not, but there's always a chance. It may be very, very tiny for really any of those companies, but that would really be where this portfolio would lose money over time, is if any of these companies went bankrupt over the time period and then their bonds went into default. You're not going to see that as with government securities. So really the risk to the overall portfolio is very small, but that would be the worst case scenario where this account could potentially lose money. But Apple, Coca-Cola, IBM, Oracle, Qualcomm, these are all A-rated or better obligations, and if anything changes with that in the credit worthiness of those companies, we will look at disposing of them and investing in a higher quality credit.
I mean, to me, this all is reflective of the conservatism of the IPS. There's no question. In my frank opinion, it's far too conservative. But that's an investment philosophy, of course, and it's not my decision. But that's what you expect when you have a portfolio this conservative, to make monies that, frankly, are not going to be very large. They're going to be less than in the order of 2% in the market today. And I agree. I don't think there's any liability to the entities you're buying, what you're buying is losing money. To Allison's point, I don't see that. But you know, the IPS is, and it's just a statement from my perspective. It's so conservative that your differential between, and we are in a risky market right now. We all know that. But the differential between the IPS level of risk and mattress money isn't hellishly big in dollars. It's just not. You know, and mattress money to me is money just money in the bank, cash. It's in my opinion, it's ultra conservative.
But we might need this in 7 years, so,
I understand.
I mean,
I understand. It's still ultra conservative. But again, this is not Camden Wealth Management. No criticism whatsoever. They're working off of what has been drafted in the IPS, and I think the directors need to understand it's extremely conservative document.
and I
Well,
think
and
that is
going
one-
back to Allison's point, I think that the committee felt like we couldn't really risk losing principal because ultimately those funds are going to be needed.
Mhm. I understand that. But there are various ways of investing money without risking the principal that goes beyond. There are very secure equity investments also that are extremely secure. But it's just a question of the IPS, again, not the Camden Wealth Management, but it's about as conservative I've ever seen for any entity trying to preserve capital.
But does that go beyond what we can do as with municipal investments?
Yeah, that's
I think I think there are numerous municipal investments that could go beyond what we have. I don't think we're restricted to that level.
right, the eternal debate.
Right.
And so this is, you know, this is where we were before.
Right.
And you can read the statutes and you can say, well, as long as it's with a fiduciary, blah, 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 then we're allowed to do whatever. And somebody can come up with that argument. Somebody can come up with another argument that says that we have to do this conservative approach. And it seems like most of the time when it comes down to it, as long as we come up with an investment policy that is justified and we explain it, and then there is wiggle room in terms of what the directors are comfortable with. But at the end of the day, it might turn out that those two things are the same, that where we are is what the directors are comfortable with, even if we could get away with more.
Correct.
Where we should really be looking at it is with their other money, because that is, looking at it as an endowment is really the right way to look at it. It's going to be forever. We are going to be pumping water or leachate out of that quarry, hopefully a little bit less of it eventually, but we're going to be doing that forever. So,
So you would invest those funds differently because if you're investing for the long term, as Patrick was saying, you are not only looking for income, but you're looking for appreciation to really carry you over that long term.
Yeah.
okay. So which page should we be on now?
I'm done. So if you guys have any questions or you know, I'd be happy to answer them. Again, if nothing comes to mind, but something, you know, you think of something later, please, you guys have my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out to me or Audrey. And, you know, we'd be happy to discuss that with you. Again, you know, the IPS is a document that we've come up with for you guys. You know, we do have to adhere to the municipal statutes, but the IPS is a living, breathing document. It is subject to change. You know, if you found that this account was going to be of a longer term nature, or, you know, you're not going to close the landfill for 20 years, that would really substantially change the dynamic of the portfolio itself. So as we're, you know, working with this relationship over time, what Audrey and I would like to do at various points is to, you know, continue to revisit that IPS with you and just make sure that what we're seeing, you know, it generally is, you know, what we should be doing. And if anything has changed, then, you know, we can certainly tear the old one up and redraft a new one. But you know, we got to make sure that that's the right thing to do.
Sure.
Yeah. The other thing that we should make sure to check on is that the additional funds that we budget every year are being transferred. And I'm not sure when the last time we did that was, but the $100,000 that we budget, you know, for each fiscal year is intended to be a part of this pot of money and should be,
Right.
you know, transferred. So that's something that
That's our job.
Mike and Beth, and I suppose that's part of my job too. But
True.
Mike, if you could remind me or somebody to look
Yeah,
into
we will. We will. It's great. But I really appreciate your time, guys, from Camden National Wealth Management. Did a great job with the IPS as a foundation, of course. I'm clearly understood, by the way. But that we really appreciate. This is great help for us for thinking capital as we go forward and think about what may occur with our landfill, what may not. What if it turns to 4 years? You know, we have
Yeah,
to.
right.
Yeah.
So we're cognizant of that, and I think there's a larger discussion we'll get to at some point about the monies that the 4 towns have put into reserve accounts for future use. That is a chunk of change also. And that's something we need to address also.
And that's what Audrey referred to, you know, as being, that we could do the sub-accounts. And if one town decided to do a sub-account and other towns decided not to, then you can do that. We don't have to all agree to do something.
Right.
Yeah,
That's correct.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, that's true. It becomes if there's some advantage to it. And frankly, I don't think any town knows whether there's an advantage to doing that or not at this point.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, I mean, this comes down to what each town is doing with the money at the moment. Is it sitting in a mattress account or is it sitting whatever? Yeah, it's all relative to that town's perspective on financial control.
Right.
So, but it's an open issue. We appreciate that, and we do need to be reminded of that all the time from Camden National Wealth Management. Thank you.
Well, you know, again, that sub-accounting is available to you. And so each town would see that, you know, they gave X, Y, or Z. It would be, you know, labeled as
Sure.
such.
That's good. That helps.
Yeah,
It helps.
and we do not charge extra for that. A lot of other places do.
Right. Well, I would admonish each of us on the boards to bring back to our towns the option of bringing into the sub-account availability. And would that sub-account be under the same IPS?
Yes.
Yeah.
If it's Midco solid waste funds with and it's ultimately to be used for the capping of the landfill. If it's not, and it's more for the longer term
Right.
funds, then we can do a different IPS for that. So we would need to have a discussion about where the funds have come from, what's the longevity of the account, because that will affect how we develop an IPS for those funds.
Perfectly stated.
Yep. And all the funds that the towns are currently holding on to are those longer, theoretically
Okay.
longer term.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay, then that would be a separate IPS.
Yeah, that's a big important thing to discuss again, with its risk reward kind of thing.
Yep.
It's not an in perpetuity fund, but it's close to it.
Well,
That's an amount
depending on your perspective, because there'll always be water that has to
Good
come out.
point.
of those.
Yeah. Well, it could be, 30 years is in perpetuity, so that's a long.
No, it's gonna be more.
Yeah.
40 years is the normal landfill, but we have a situation where we're gonna have to take care of ours for literally forever because it's a hole in the ground rather than a mountain above ground. So
In the ground that leaks water. You're right.
And the amount that represents us, all 4 towns, that is, when we were talking about the sub-accounts, that amount is close to $1 million, isn't it?
it's
I think
actually more than that.
More than $1 million. I thought it was
It was like 1.2 when it first came back to us.
That's what I thought it was, Allison. 1.2 something total that we distributed a couple of years ago. Yeah, that's it's kind of a loop. It's what do I invest and how, but there's a chicken and an egg thing. You got to figure out the IPS and how it's going to work, and present that to the towns and see what they want to do versus what they're doing with it now, if anything, because we don't know that, and decide whether we put into a separate sub-accounts with a separate IPS.
Well, I think what you just said is really important, Bob, because maybe in order to get this off the, in order for us to make some progress on this, maybe if Audrey and Patrick could put together something that, you know, could just be sort of
Outline.
an example of what we might be able to do, you know, if they're longer term funds, if it was $1 million, whatever it is, what it might look like. Because then, I mean, if the town select boards had the ability to look at what they might realize in those sub-accounts if it was connected, you know, to, or handled by, managed by Camden versus wealth management versus what they're doing in their own individual towns, maybe that just gives them enough information to say, oh, well, you know, maybe this makes sense for us.
Yeah, I think if there's even an outline of an IPS strategy, rather than having to worry about drafting all the words, but what would Camden Wealth Management recommend for what is effectively approximately 1.2 million fund in perpetuity?
Yep.
Municipal fund.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that could actually help us make some headway perhaps on the issue.
Yeah, it might help. I mean, at least we have something to chew on
Right.
and to discuss rather than esoteric, you know, invest some money somewhere versus where we're investing it now or not.
Right.
That would be great.
Yep.
We could
Yeah.
do that. That'd be great.
All right, we
And
will
again,
get that to you.
We could definitely do that. Yep.
Thanks so much and really appreciate your time and on short notice, by the way. So kudos on both of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking again. Thank you.
All right, take
absolutely.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Enjoy your tacos. Bye. Bye.
Moving on with our agenda.
Thank you. I will.
Bye-bye. We have next to look at a motion to review, to approve the meeting minutes of April 29th, 2020.
I move that the board approve the meeting minutes of April 29, 2020 as presented.
I'll second.
Discussion, Allison?
Yeah, just like a couple tiny little things. Under item D, on page 2, it says, consider McKellar open discussion on the invoices. So just get rid of, I think we just need to get rid of the word consider at the beginning. And then on the next page, on page 3, on the 3rd line, it says St. Laurent agreed with the tracking and reminded the coming, oh, well, that's really nitpicky. That, now that I read it out loud, it doesn't sound so bad the way it is, but I would change the to that. Or that, the.
Where is that, Allison?
It's really, I shouldn't have even brought it up now that I read it out loud. But it's the 3rd line of page 3. St. Laurent agreed with the tracking and reminded the coming months are usually busier. When I read this to myself, it sounded wrong, but it sounds okay now. Remind that, I think it should be reminded that the coming months are usually busier. Those are just 2 little typo things.
Okay, that's fine. Good catch, Allison. Any other comments on the meeting minutes? With that, Karen, will we revise your motion to move to accept with Allison's comments?
As amended.
No,
All right, then we'll go for a roll call vote from Wendy,
Yes.
Allison,
Yes, I.
Karen,
Yes.
Denise,
yes,
and Deborah.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
I'll abstain. I weren't there.
Okay, the good catch, bud. And Bob is an aye also. Thank you very much. Moving on to our item D, which would be our facility manager report. Mr. Mike, this is your first official one.
Okay, so my first month, we'll see how I did here in the month of May. I hope everyone has a copy of it. We could share it, Allison, if you wanted, or I can just go off the cuff here.
Sure, do you want me to share? I can pull it up and share it, and as if you want to get
If you want
started.
to.
It was so nicely done.
I know it was.
Thank you.
That I just need to pull up that email real quick. I have a hard copy that I've
Good.
been looking at, but go ahead and I'll pull it up as you're talking if you want.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I started off it this report with safety. I think that's important to touch on. Of course, the big topic is the COVID-19. And I think that it's gone very well at the facility, both with the employees and the public. Social distancing has been observed by everyone. Things seem to go very smoothly, especially with the opening of recycling that we'll get into here. So there really hasn't been any complaints or any issues on that front. One thing we had an injury on May 14th, a minor. We had an employee who was working the line. Basically, he was along the recycling bins. It was very windy that day, and he got dust in his eye. He utilized our eye wash station, flushed out his eye, but after an hour or so, it was still irritating him. So we went to an optometrist who diagnosed a minor scratch on his cornea and diagnosed or prescribed some eye drops. There was no follow-up. We did notify the insurance company of a first injury report. Excuse me, I gotta change my screen a little bit here. No follow-up, and it's basically done, but it's one of these things, these minor injuries, these first aid type things I like to document and keep track of. So moving on to the transfer facility. The big news in May is that we opened up phase 1 of the recycling program. We did a specific list of materials, the number 2 natural and colored, the steel and tin cans, newsprint, cardboard, and universal wastes. And you'll notice I skipped over mixed paper because originally we were not going to roll that out. However, based on popular public demand, everyone showed up with mixed paper. So we did end up putting that can out. So we are now taking that material. It went very well. It went better than we expected. We prepared for the worst. We prepared for cars lined up on Union Street, but it didn't happen. The public observed their social distancing. We did not need to control traffic. Everything seemed to go quite smoothly. So we were happy with that. And because of that, we left the cans out for the remainder of the weekend, which would have been that Friday and Saturday. And since then have rolled out every day that we're open, Tuesday through Saturday, we are collecting this specific list of materials. And that's been updated on our Facebook page as well as the website. So that was the big news on the recycling. In May, we also paved the area of the sewer line that was repaired. That repair was done before I came on board, but that was completed. We also, we had a small sinkhole just adjacent to that area that we also filled in and paved. And that's something I'm keeping an eye on. It seems to be in the area of what I believe to be the YMCA sewer line runs through our property. And it seems to sort of be in line with that. It's in the gut. It's in this whole area. So something we'll keep an eye on to see if that, gets any worse, if the pavement erodes anymore. Another minor thing that I noticed when I came on board is our petroleum tanks were not labeled or identified properly. So that was another little minor thing that we took care of. If you scroll down, you'll see I put some pictures in this one, so you can see the petroleum tanks labeled and the paving area, and there's all the cans the containers are rolled back out. We will be doing the Household Hazardous Waste Day. I've contacted EPI. They're our pickup and disposal company. Still haven't got an email back with a contract from them, but the tentative schedule right now is June 20th in the afternoon from 12:30 to 3:30. And we will put a public notice out to announce that. I'll have to get a hold of Brett over at EPI and get that contract finalized. So those were the big things on the transfer station. We can move on to more of the landfill operation and the leachate monitoring. The big thing on the landfill this month was the installation of a new monitoring well. That was to replace the damaged piezometer. And I went with a monitoring well over a piezometer, and the difference really is the size of the well. Piezometer is a 1-inch well. This is a 2-inch well. And installation went very smoothly. We managed to drill down and get to bedrock, which is about 90 feet below the current surface of the landfill in that area. They drilled 2 feet into bedrock to confirm we were in bedrock. And then they installed the well down about 91.5 feet. So we know we got right down to bedrock. It's a good well. The problem was when they were pulling the casing out. So when you put a well in, you put a steel pipe down first, and you put the well down inside that. Well, when they were pulling it out, that casing broke. We know that we've got 5 feet up from the bottom of the well, so 90 feet, so about 85 feet. And then what they pulled out was the remainder. So we know that we've got 40 feet of well casing stuck in the ground. I had them install 10 feet of screen on that well, which is just about 5 feet more than you need. But considering it's a monitoring well and we want to make sure that we've got good hydraulic connectivity, there's no harm in putting a little extra screen in there, which is a good thing considering the casing broke. We developed the well, which means that we just pumped water out of it. We monitored the rate of the water. We checked the amount of drawdown, meaning how much water within the well went down while we were pumping. And we had good results with all of them. So we determined that that well is a viable well, especially since we're just monitoring leachate level, water level within the quarry. We don't need to do any extensive sampling on that well. So so we kept it. It's something we got to keep an eye on because the casing's still in the ground. But so far, so good. So that's all installed. We do still have all of the transponder and the additional stuff to make it an automated system with the VFD and the pumps and all that. And I'm working to get that up and running. The other thing that we did was the fire suppression system, and talking with Mike, I believe it's Mike Eaton of Brookside Plumbing, who I need to kind of light a fire under him to get him moving a little faster. But he's got all the parts and pieces that we need to set up a manifold system so that if we see evidence of a fire on site, we have the equipment to put the pipes in the ground and start putting the water to it. So Mike is supposed to be on site this week, and we'll see. Like I said, I got to call him tomorrow and see where he's at with that. So
Is that using leachate or using drinking water?
Leachate water.
Oh, good.
The initial thing is to do leachate water, but if we have a fire like we did last time, knock on wood, I do want to get a portable pumping system that we could plumb into the North Quarry and get that water and then pump that up on the hill and use that as well. So that, and I think I got a note on there. Yeah, a backup pump will be purchased. So
Yeah.
But both are in the works right now.
Sometimes the North Quarry, they've said before that we have to be careful about anything we do there because it's rising, obviously, and the long-term plan is to be able to spill that over as stormwater. And the top 17 feet or so are really good quality water and could be spilled over as stormwater. But sometimes when we do things in there, hopefully just pumping from the top wouldn't do that. But sometimes the whole thing will turn, and when we've done different projects, and it would jeopardize our ability to spill that over as stormwater. So as long just a small little thing to keep in mind.
Sure, certainly keep that in mind. And I've been, checking the level of that. It seems to have stabilized. I mean, we haven't gotten a lot of rain in the last week or so, but it's been pretty consistent over the last, I'd say, 2 or 3 weeks, that water level. So, I mean,
It came up fast though over the last.
Oh, it came up very fast. Just in the first 2 weeks I was there, it came up fast. So.
Yeah, we probably should be doing we have some preliminary plans of how the outlet will be, and just something to keep in.
Yep. Yeah, I've talked with CV and Mahar and asked for a proposal on the, basically a culvert to spill over that quarry into our stormwater detention pond. I haven't heard back from him yet, but that's on the list.
Awesome.
The next line down is I received 2 proposals for earthwork to basically fix the western side of the landfill. And I think Dave had updated the board on this matter. Basically, we need to extend the berm. There's a stormwater berm around the base of the pile on the western side. It comes around sort of behind the chipping area, brush pile. And then we need some intermediate cover up on that western side. I got 2 proposals. They were both $9,000. So I'm hoping that project can start next week is when we're planning to do that. In addition to that, because we'll have the equipment on site directly behind the chipper area near the leachate wet well, there's some work to be done there. That we're gonna fix that. We're gonna berm it, and we can start putting demo material in there, which will help stabilize basically the whole northern section of the landfill. We can strip back some intermediate cover. We can bring some material in, bring it up, and kind of stabilize that area. So, hoping that
another $9,000 of what is this budget? I mean, we're already over in everything, right?
Landfill development, based on the May expense that we've got, we still have $11,000 on that line item. So, although
there are some things that we already said we would pay from there that I don't think we've been invoiced for. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. That's been an area of concern for me just when I've walked back behind where the Y is too, but it might fall under a finance committee thing of.
Yeah, this is definitely it's a fire concern. It's a regulatory concern with the DEP.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I think Allison, when you were at my office the other day, we discussed the additional invoices. I think Haggerty is one of them, the pump guy. We haven't seen his invoice. And then there was another one. So,
yeah,
we're closely tracking that. We're watching all of those costs. So.
Technically, expenses of over $5,000 are supposed to be reviewed by the finance committee, but it gets a little fuzzy in these areas of sort of known, if it falls under known work that is required for landfill maintenance. Historically, a lot of things haven't come to the finance committee that maybe should have, but it might just be good for the board to give you the authority tonight to go ahead and do that.
It was my impression that the board was aware of the need for this repair on the on that western side.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, I don't think so, but I don't think that was part of what is in the budget for landfill development this year. I'm not too concerned about it, but it does fall over that $5,000 threshold that it says in our bylaws. So we could simplify it tonight by just being crystal clear from the board that it is okay to go ahead and do that without having to come back to us or the finance committee.
Yeah, the action should be to go back to your point, Allison, to come back and figure out, yeah, it's got to be done. We want to do it. It's above 5,000. The finance committee needs to look at how we're going to fund this and where and how. If it comes in landfill development or someplace else. I believe we have a long list from the last meeting when we discussed a number of items that were going to wind up in certain accounts that had to be have a second look by the finance committee as to how they're accounted for. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we agreed to overrun those, the appropriate lines.
Right.
The $5,000 thing with the finance committee is a little bit fuzzy because it's not generally been used for things that are like known sort of cell development issues, but since so much there's been so much turnover here, it's fuzzy between what is known, what was known and what was unknown. But I think it definitely has to be done and probably just falls under that same kind of guideline of it's okay to overspend the necessary line, and then at the end of the fiscal year the finance committee will review whether, before it goes to the auditor, will review whether there are adjustments that need to be made in terms of funding from reserve accounts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Clearly landfill development is the right place for that to come out of, but if just reviewing our minutes from last time, we said about a number of things that should be funded from landfill development, that should be funded from landfill development, and not all of those things are part of the current expense sheet that we're looking at. So
okay. No, we should clarify that. It's important. There's probably more discussion we could have on the 5,000, but let's stick on this topic right now. And for now, we'll just get the work proposed, and then we'll figure out. And for now, we'll assume it's going to go into landfill development until finance committee tells us it needs to be something else.
I mean, what I'm proposing is that it not go. I think it's necessary enough that I just wanted to be clear that I don't think it should need to go to the finance committee in this case.
Oh.
That it should. There aren't a lot of options. It needs to be done.
Yep.
But to make sure that we don't get tripped up with needing to have a finance committee meeting or anything like that. So I would just
Agreed. I was just referring to
that the board, give him the authority to do that in case there is.
we're on the same page, Alice. Now that's what I was trying to say. We don't need to get to the finance committee, except for if the finance committee wants to look at later how we're accounting for this stuff, we can discuss it later, but we don't need to get in the way of getting this done.
Yeah.
Mike, go on.
Okay, understood. So speaking of the landfill, one of the most common complaints that I received since I've been here was the public access at the top of the landfill was too narrow. So what we did is we moved Bob's shack. If you've been up there, you've seen Bob's shack. We've moved it and we brought in some fill material. Not your shack, Bob. Different Bob.
I was going to clarify that, please.
Bob does not have a shack.
Bob Welsh. Bob Welsh. We moved the shack. So we've improved it. We've got a little bit more to do to make Bob happy, which is important for your bulldozer guy because he does a great job up there. So, but that's a big improvement up on that area. We also added fencing, and this I gotta give some credit to Mr. Dave St. Laurent on this one because it was his idea to put fencing up there to help mitigate trash and debris blowing off the top of the landfill and getting down into the woods, into the berms. So we did manage to put a couple 100 feet on top of the landfill. And we also put about 200 feet along the compactors to help prevent material from blowing down into the stormwater ditches along there. So that's been installed, and so far so good. So
Great.
You cleaned up all that trash. It looks so much nicer in many places there.
yep. And then the last one for the landfill, and this was installed just in time for Memorial Day, was a new American flag was placed on top of the landfill on May 19th. We got very positive comments from the community, especially the veterans. And there is a picture, if you go down a little bit, there's a picture of it. There it is up on top of the hill. The picture on the left, that rusty looking pipe, is our new well that was installed. And this Bob's bulldozer here we were in the process of expanding it. So from pretty much where the blade is to the left is the new material that we're placing in there to make that area more accessible. Moving on to the administrative side of things, a lot of my focus in May has been updating the environmental safety and operation manual and training programs. There are a lot of plans here that are in need of revision, updating, including the operations manual, which hadn't been touched since 2012, stormwater pollution prevention plan since 2017, and then spill prevention control and countermeasure plan, which the facility didn't even have, which is required. So I've been working on that as well. Each of these plans usually has an appendix, such as the health and safety manual or operated trading programs. All of these appendices and these plans need to be updated and revised as well. So I've been working on that. I get into a little bit more on the SPCC plan. If a facility has more than 1,320 gallons of petroleum or the potential to store more than that, they need a plan. And we have, we've got at least 1,500, 1,700 gallons of potential storage. So I have drafted the plan. However, these plans need to be stamped by a PE in order to be certified and legit. So I reached out to CV Mahar. They do our operations manual. And I'm waiting on a quote back from them. Basically, I wrote the plan, so they come out, review it, make sure it's good, they stamp it, and we're done. And then monthly monitoring and some other requirements there. Let me scroll down a little more here. The safety training for personnel is another thing that I'm updating. It's kind of fallen behind a little bit, minor things. Beth has actually done a really good job in maintaining, training for new employees and keeping up to date as best she can on it. So that's a big help. She's got a lot of the things already in place, but we're sort of bolstering that program and getting it going again. Mobile equipment training. I mean, most of these guys have been running the equipment for, 40 years, but it's good to get them, recertified and retrained on it. The other item that's coming up in a couple of months here is the fire suppression system in the recycling building. It actually failed the flush test back in October of 2019. So it needs to be thoroughly flushed with water. And we have a proposal to do that for $18,000. That cost is in the budget. It was budgeted for 2020. So we will go ahead and schedule that for July and August, especially with getting the recycling programs back running again. We should have a certified fire suppression system in that building.
Hold on, was that budgeted for this fiscal year or for next fiscal year?
Next fiscal.
Okay.
So it's in the
we call that
2021. Sorry.
2021.
It's in the next budget.
Perfect.
And then the next section on here, I just put board information, and this is sort of just it's projects that are coming up or things that are out there. I didn't really intend them to be agenda items, but I wanted to keep you guys apprised of what's going on and what's coming up. The big one here, the first one, is sheetrock disposal costs. So I've been crunching some numbers here, and I figured currently we are losing $17.20 per ton of sheetrock that we send offsite. And that's at CPRC. That's the facility that receives the material down in South Portland. At their current rate of $100.21 and the current rate of $5.70 a ton per load, we're losing money. I got a notice from CPRC. They're increasing their disposal fee to $112 per ton. So what that means is going forward, we're going to start losing $29 per ton of sheetrock at our current rate. And
So the board actually has a policy that already voted on that we're supposed to not lose any money on that. So you can probably, I think you already have the authority to adjust that price for incoming material so that it is a cost neutral.
If you scroll down a little bit. So I'm going for July 1st. We're going to increase sheetrock to basically 9 cents per pound, which is a 2-cent increase because we're currently aligned with demo at 7. So we'll go up to 9 cents per pound. It's $40 a ton. We'll make a little bit of money. We won't lose money. So that is scheduled for July 1st.
Thank you for noticing that. That's great.
What you hired me for. All right.
I hate losing money on sheetrock. So.
Right. Yeah. And if you look at the expense line for May, I think we're $1,300 in the red already, and it's directly related to these costs. So, RHR audit with our RHR Smith, the 2020 audit, we will be retaining their services moving forward. So we sent it off.
Let's have that go to the finance committee before we go have them again.
Okay.
What?
Remember, Deborah, how we've talked about that he was saying how we were going to use RHR again. The finance committee, or I don't know if it's maybe the governance committee, that's wanted to review all the contracts rather than automatically going with the same auditor.
Right, and I think I thought that in the bylaws it says the board has to approve the auditor.
It should.
Definitely.
It should say that. So it should not be the finance committee or anybody making that decision. It should be a board decision.
So he said unless otherwise directed by the board.
Yeah, no, I'm not criticizing anything Michael said. I'm just saying that I think it says that in the bylaws, and if it doesn't, it should, because I think it should be a board decision, as it is in our towns. It certainly is in Rockport.
Either way, I remember how the decision got made to when we ended up with them, and it was kind of like jumping on the Camden bandwagon of like just do what Camden does. And even though I'm obviously partial to Camden in many ways, I don't think that always works out well for Midco Solid Waste.
Well, Rockport had RHR too, so it wasn't just Camden, but we just voted last night to go with a different auditor.
Right.
And we're going with Smith & Associates, and they were even a little bit higher than RHR, not much higher, but a little higher. And we went with them because we are very unhappy with the situation of not having a final audit yet.
And RHR's price got much better when we asked for bids. I mean, we actually paid them $5,000 more this year than what they're now forecasting they would have charged us if we'd hired them. So,
first off, I think we should be sending it out to bid, and secondly, we should be
absolutely. I was going to say who should lead the RFP process?
Board.
Deborah, who should lead the RFP process for audit services?
The manager, probably, or the finance committee can help if you want. But.
I think we can. Mike can certainly get information for future consideration by the board in terms of our services going forward. That sounds pretty clear. It sounds like a pretty smart strategy to me.
And we could give you, I mean, just not whether you need the assistance or not, we could give you a copy of the RFP that Rockport just sent out.
Good idea.
We've had, we should fill you in at some point on some of the back and forth, because it's the way that the transfer station works and everything, and municipalities. It's been a frustrating process a little bit with them. We've made progress, but I'd really love to see what some others say.
Deborah, get that information to Mike, and we can take it from there.
Yep, I'll do that.
Mike, onward.
Thank you. Glad I put that in there.
Yeah.
We did receive the final copies of the 2019 financial statements. Those were completed. I actually got them electronically today. They're sending out hard copies. So 2019 is done.
And it should have been done in December, right?
It shouldn't be done in May.
Well, I mean,
that is us, but
Rockport expects it to be done at the end of December, so that and I know we're on a different budget, so yeah, it's a good point. Rockport is of course on a different budgeting process. They expected it to be done the end of December so that they would have the audit, you know, for their budget preparation. So of course we are on a different schedule, and we're approving our budgets at the end of December. So,
right.
So obviously it's earlier than that we expected.
Yeah, I don't know when they had their draft done, and if it just got caught up in the transition between managers and no one keeping an eye on it, because I know it had been completed much earlier, prior to now.
Okay.
But the draft
There's a long backstory to this that probably is better as a private conversation.
I think here nor there at this point, like, it's done.
Yeah, just so you know, Rockport's was due the end of December, and we still don't have it finalized.
It's always prudent to have a draft report before you do a budget. We should take into consideration the RFP.
The problem for them, for Midco Solid Waste, is different. Camden had the same problem with them taking a long time to do it, but the problem for Midco Solid Waste was that there were so many errors.
Right.
And it's been a back and forth, and then they're unable to provide us with helpful information a lot of the time, because they see us as a typical corporation and they describe us as such. So when you want to find out an unassigned fund balance from them, all they want to tell us is that we are, like, net position is negative $4 million. And that's not helpful for knowing how much cash on hand we have. And it's just a whole long.
Well, let's just leave it now that we're going to pursue the RFP and move on, Mike.
Okay. The next item that I had, there's a new access road construction. And CV Mahar had provided draft plans to us and to the DP for, cell development of the landfill and a new road on the western edge. And, Dave has helped me a lot with this, and we're looking at the development. And I believe the idea is that if you put the road on the western edge, you can increase the landfill to mate to the other portion of the currently capped landfill to achieve final closure elevations. I don't know that new road is even required. I think we can build up and build out the landfill without spending that additional $20,000 to $40,000 on a road, using the existing road. So I bring it up only because some conversations with CV Mahar and the DEP are warranted on this issue. We wouldn't have to change traffic direction. We wouldn't have to sort of remanage the facility. We can just build out under maybe a slightly modified cell development plan, maintaining the current access. So just another one that's a project that's on the plate for discussion. Scrolling down slightly, grinding and mulching services. I added this in here. Bob had sent me an email I don't know who else got it, but Maine Custom Woodlands has reached out to us expressing interest in grinding and mulching at the solid waste facility. The picture there is our 20-something-year-old grinder, which is quite often in need of repair. So I think it would be beneficial to sit down with Maine Custom and at least have a conversation about what kind of potential savings we could have by having them provide that mulching service. So they're on my list of contact in June. Hopefully in the June report, I can update the board on that project. So.
Mhm.
That'd be good to hear.
And that's all I get.
Great, Mike.
for
Thanks,
this month.
thanks so
I'm
much.
not sure if this is a good time to ask about food waste and the composting service there. There've been some recent articles I've seen where food waste is just one of these huge climate change contributors, and it actually, for landfill, is a great thing if you can figure out a compost, way to deal with the food waste outside of the landfill. Of course, we had scrap dogs, and I get updates from them, and they're not operating. Is that because of anything we've done, or are they having their own problems?
I have not been in contact with scrap dogs yet. However, it's on my list because there is interest from the community. I've been asked about it, so it's something that I want to look at. I had considered the composting in a phase 2 or maybe a phase 3 opening with the recycling. Not having experience with it in the past of how that operation went, I'd have to lean to you guys and to my staff to see the best time to roll that out. But certainly, I'm open to doing it. So, sort of a side thing, which we'll be getting into next, is the hauling contract. The hauler actually has a composting business as well, and Dave and I briefly talked with the operator. So there may be opportunity with that facility or that company as well. So there may be other options out there.
I think it's on the radar, Denise, to answer your question, definitely on the radar. Allison, yeah.
But let's just be clear. It was going great. It was scrap dogs. It was well utilized. Everything was great. But they stopped, and they've stopped not only our service, but definitely not anything that Midco Solid Waste did. It came almost as a surprise to us when it happened. Well, it did come as a surprise when it happened. And so they've stopped with all of their curbside too. And so I think what the right thing to do is, it's been quite a while, and since we haven't heard from them a start date, it would make sense to reach out to them, find out if there is a start date that we could depend on. And if not, then really actively pursue other options, because what we showed is that people use it. It was really well liked. We were diverting a ton of food waste. And we can't wait around forever for scrap dogs, but hopefully I'm hoping they have a reopening plan.
Yeah, good point. Remember, we have a written agreement with them.
But it's expired, so it's
right. So we need to just follow through, Mike, and it's on your radar. We need to follow through and make sure we have this element covered. If they're not interested, none of us have any idea what's going on there at this point.
Okay.
All right. Moving on to next item, which is the board discussion decision regarding hauling contractor and result of RFP, RFQ. Just a brief background here. Back in February, the strategic committee then was talking about looking at issuing an RFP, RFQ to hauling contractors to take a look at the options for Midco Solid Waste. It was agreed we wouldn't meet again until we had some input on those documents, and Dave Sonarone did work on those, sent them out, and helped us pull together the numbers. And then again, in the last meeting of the strategic committee, came up with a discussion on and a comparison of these numbers, and that's what we're here to discuss today. And I don't care if Mike or you or Dave want to lead this discussion, but Mike, why don't you start off?
Okay. Allison, do you have
sorry. Yes.
that other document? Yes. All right. So kind of a follow-up with what Bob was talking about. There's some text there. So basically, Dave and I met with Jesse Haskell of Haskell Trucking on May 11th, and we laid out our needs, our wants, and he was very agreeable to the conditions. He had two caveats in that one, he wanted to find a local driver.
Well, Mike, before you go into Haskell, let's make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of, we got three proposals.
All right, I guess I'll back up. So we did get the three proposals, and Dave actually got these proposals. So Dave, I miss anything, just fill me in. We went to Grindle Transport, we went to Haskell, and we've got our current WFT, which is Windsong Farm Trucking. And you can see here in the graph, these are the bids that they offered. Haskell had two rates that they could offer. The first one being the $508, and that was based on using, from what he called from his dooryard. So not using a local driver from his facility, he was $508. If he can find a local driver, he could drop that down to $436. Grindle was a flat 570. Our current guy is a 671, and I added in there the proposed 2020 bid rate of 725, and I used this number. It's the anticipated number that he's going to charge us in the following year. So the numbers are sort of based on that. The two caveats that Haskell had, or first, does anyone have any questions on those numbers, where any of that came from? Are we good? Okay. So the two caveats is that
Mike,
Haskell
I think that the Haskell had actually two numbers.
Yep. 508, 436.
The 50, I think Haskell had another number that's not shown in here that was a little higher than Grindle's. But he gave us these other two also as options, just not that it matters or anything, but there was a third number we're not showing in here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, and we have, this is sort of an excerpt from a spreadsheet that Dave and I put together, which has a lot more information in it. And this is just sort of the summary for this agenda, this discussion here. So we can certainly provide that, to the board. But I mean, the breakdown, the big item here is the potential cost savings, which you can see in red there. Going with Haskell for the next year, we could save $65,000. Going with Grindle, we could save 33 this year alone. And then you can see that the 2021 to 2020 savings is an even greater increase. So,
Mike, just to clarify again, the Haskell $65,000 savings in this coming fiscal year is based on 6 months of a non-local driver and 6 months of a local driver. Is that correct?
That is correct.
$83,000 would be a full year of a local driver only.
Correct. Yep.
But he's been willing to guarantee this, right? It's not up in the air as to whether he can get a driver or he can't get a driver.
Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave. He would sign a contract at these rates.
He said that he would sign a contract. He just needed 6 months to find a local driver. He kind of already had a guy in mind. I think that had worked for him before. And the other part of this was that he was going to have to make an initial investment for a roll-off trailer. In talking with him, my opinion is that this guy's solid, and I think you really want to set up a longer term contract with him, because the RFP incorporates any decision you make and where you can go. These hauling rates aren't going to go down. This guy is, in my opinion, a super solid. I mean, solid guy. I mean, he's probably one of the better options that are out there. And I'd like to. I would suggest locking him in for, you know, as long a term as the board can stomach. To be honest with you.
What term do you recommend, Dave?
So,
Dave, what term do you recommend?
I think I would try and do a 10-year with this guy. That would be what I would do.
Okay.
Yep, five minimum.
Yeah.
You know, if he's going to make the investment in the trailer and that, I mean, minimum would be 5. 10, I would support a 10.
And the other thing you have to remember is part of this investment and long-term contract, he's buying the new containers in 2 years.
Right.
So he's buying a trailer, 5 new containers, and he's giving you a rock bottom hauling rate with just a CPI built into it and a fuel surcharge. So, I mean, you can't get any better than that. I mean, look where you're at now compared to where you would be. I mean, that's a no-brainer.
So Dave, just to be.
Bob, I'm not sure if you can see that Kern has been raising his hand.
No, I can't see him at all.
It's yeah.
Kern, good, thank you, Allison.
So obviously, Haskell is a very reputable outfit. I did a little checking on him. The problem that I can see with this is we've got a hauler right now that potentially isn't under contract.
Right.
Haskell has asked for 6. You know, he's got 6 to 8 week lead time, 6 to 8 weeks lead time on a trailer, and he's asked for 6 months to find a driver. What if we engage him, and our current hauler says, "Hey, I'm done with you." We're in a world of hurt. So Haskell can't start immediately.
No, I mean,
by this information. So we're in a little bit of a corner here.
Dave?
It was an RFQ. We've made no commitments with any of the transporters yet. We're just looking at the numbers. I guess Winsong Farm could have left, you know, a month ago, and we'd be in the same situation. So I guess it is what it is. If he said today that he wasn't going to haul for us, I'd find someone else to do it. That would be just the way I would go about doing it. It might cost more,
Yeah,
but that would be what we would do.
When was the postulated start date for Haskell to start work if we were to choose him?
I think it has to do with getting the trailer. I put August in this form, only, you know, 6 to 8 weeks. As soon as he has the trailer, he can start running from his dooryard. So
he also said that he could get a trailer quicker. It just wasn't the trailer he really wanted. That was the other thing he said in the conversation. So I don't think we're limited by that time frame. If we were in an emergency, I mean, I could get Grindle to do it, you know?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, he wanted to buy a new trailer. He wants to buy good equipment. He can go use, but he would prefer not to.
Other board comments?
I've got one.
no,
Wait, let Dave.
I was gonna say,
Dave Barrows.
I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but if I remember this 10-year contract, we're going to have the landfill will be capped by that time, and we're going to be doing a whole new game at that point. What do we go with the extra 5 years, 5 to 7 years on our contract, or 4 years? I don't think that we have 10 years
We're
worth
gonna
of
be hauling
life
it
left
out
on the landfill, do we?
This is for MSW. The landfill part will get expanded when the landfill closes and only make this person's job larger. And
Okay.
securing those long-term contracts will only help you.
Okay, so you're not, it's that we're locked in at that point in time from all the ideas we've thrown out there. We're locked in at that point in time at this location, at this place for 10 years? Because I know we had
Nope.
talked previously of
No.
other areas, other thoughts, other things going on.
Right. Right.
The RFP that I put out, the RFQ has every disposal option in it with a listed cost for that destination. So you can use that contract to go anywhere with this one hauler.
Okay.
Other comments?
I'm sorry, but I think that it isn't inappropriate to start with a 5-year contract and going forward and with maybe an option to renew for another 5 years later, however that would be worded or transmitted.
You could do that also. That was part of the RFP. There was 3 options. There was, I think, a 2-year option, a 5, and a 10. And he gave rates and dollar amounts for all of those, for every destination in the state that's possible. So you kind of have an a la carte or whatever you want to do for any of those 3 terms.
And what, how many years is it that we have to get select board approval? And the select boards, isn't there a certain number of years that we can enter a contract for?
I thought that was limited only to the other aspect of the landfill, but I'm not sure. I don't recall
I'm
it.
not sure either. I think there's some limit on how long a contract we can enter into, maybe. So
There is.
we have to look at what it is.
It's 3 years.
I thought it was 3 years, but then I thought maybe I was wrong. Yeah.
And there are some ways around that. You can put in the contract that, you know, it's subject to town approval, and most of the time providers will work with us in good faith because they know that it's highly likely.
Right.
And we could ask, it's been done in the past. What is really up for discussion is whether it actually would even have to go to voters too. But if there's an interim thing that we could do, if it is determined that it would need final approval to be long-term, we could probably do a slightly weaker version of it. Like in Camden, for example, we just did a 5-year contract with the town attorney, but in there, it basically, you know, gives us the out that if it's not approved at, you know, the annual town meeting, then it's all null and void. I would personally tend to very strongly agree with Dave St. Laurent that this is a really good option, just looking at what everybody else is paying, and it's hard to see any reason or any benefit to not doing the longest term contract as possible. This is what it always comes down to with solid waste as well, with the actual disposal, that it just gets more expensive in the long run. So
Yeah, I agree. How are you recommending we craft this approach with whomever we select here? A 3-year within the agreement, then after that it's continues for X years with the town's approval?
I would suggest that that would be, I think, a conservative approach. I think we should take a second look at it, maybe even just with the governance committee briefly, to see if there's a way to do it without also just we might want to authorize the manager or whomever to you know, enter into negotiations, or however we want to put it, and see kind of what his comfort level is as well, what he would need in the contract to feel
right.
Sure, but
yeah, that probably is the motion would be to have the facility manager to enter into agreement negotiations with the selected vendor, and in parallel we could have governance, Deborah, or somebody take a look at creative languages that we're discussing here to insert into that contract. For whatever.
Yeah, we can do that.
And I agree that it seems to me the longer the agreement you can do, the smarter you are. Because if there, as I heard Dave and Mike say this is, if we went for a long-term contract, is a CPI adjustment and a fuel surcharge adjustment only.
That's it.
That's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I mean, see, every time you shorten that contract and you put in, you know, another 5-year extension, if agreeable by both parties, you're opening the contract up for a rate hike. And every contract I've negotiated with in this industry has gotten longer. And each time I've done a longer one, it's turned out better. The shorter ones, I wish I've done longer. So
Yeah.
that's just my hindsight experience on it. You know, whatever your comfort level is, you should do. But I mean, sometimes you'll scare a guy who's getting into the industry like this guy with a short term because he has to make the equipment investment. But I mean, the RFP did offer a 2-year component to it.
Oh, you're breaking out.
You're phasing out, Dave. We've lost.
So the 2-year RFP did not have the container portion built into it. Only the 5 and the 10-year did. So, so that's the other part of it. But I talked with Mike about this, and we kind of have to reword a little bit of it because of the way, you know, the caveats that Mike was talking about, and the fact that maybe it's got to be a 3-year, and he makes the investment in the trailer, and then at that 3-year point, there's another 3-year renewal where he purchases the containers, you know, something of that nature.
Okay, well, I think
And is that because we don't think we can get select board approval from each of the towns, or?
The problem is that it would be mostly for the time, because the what it says in our interlocal agreement is that we can sign up to 3-year contracts without going back to the towns. But then beyond that, it's not only in the past, like with the solid waste contract for 30 years, or for even the Eco Maine one, most of the select boards, since they're not, well, none of us are city councils, we ourselves don't have the authority to do that. And so it ends up going to all of the voters. And it's just I mean, technically even our annual budget could get voted down by the voters in the towns. It's very unlikely. It's like kind of like the same thing with the schools. So if we were to just say, I believe that we could do a contract that says for 10 years, and we could say it would be subject to approval by, you know, by the towns, or Paul Gibbons actually could work with us on that language, because he's done that a lot in the past. But that it should be that would give somebody enough, the hauler, enough security to.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that you could do a contract that is, it's for sure 3 years, but it's subject to, you know, it's 10 years subject
But we
to.
really want you for 10. We just
Right.
have to go through some
that's what I was
hurdles.
thinking, why, if you, when Allison mentioned, we've done something like that on an annual basis, but we could do a long-term agreement which guarantees in a sense, guarantees 3 years, and then each 3-year increment would be pending, you know, approval of the board or whatever the heck has to happen.
Yeah, I think there are ways we can do it. And you know, when it comes to the annual meeting, I mean, just to further complicate it, well, last night we decided we're not going to do an annual meeting. I mean, a town meeting. And we don't have to under our charter. So everything is going to be by secret ballot or referendum.
Another option would be you could wrap it into your disposal contract that you have to renew next year. Because that has to get voted on, like you said, and it might be just something you wrap in with that.
Right. So we start with the 3-year, with whatever, start with the 3 years, whatever language we want to put in it with creativity. But you're right, coming into next year, we're going to be looking at a new, or maybe something different than Eco Maine or Eco Maine, whatever. But that would have to go to voters.
Right.
And make sure the hauler knows we want 10 years. I mean, I hate to see, I mean, the irony is this is to protect the voters, and yet this is a better deal for the voters if we get them a 10-year contract.
Well, that we're willing to go to 10, but I think that a 5 is not the minimal, but it's not the ultimate. And in that sense, we would feel as we went through those 5 years, that would give us confidence in the services. And then, of course, the exit or the severance kind of option would need to be there really clearly for a 10-year. We'd have to have, because if we're locked into 10 years after year 5 or 6, we aren't content with the, you know, with the way it goes forward. Our what are our options from there? If we go out too far, we found that we would like to.
Well, there could be termination language in any contract, but it sounds like we start,
right, but something that we feel comfortable with.
Right, but we start probably.
He would too.
With language, as Deborah and Allison and everybody's talking about here, that says this is our intent is to go long-term. We really want 10 years, but we can't sign up for that because of the bylaws and the interlocal agreement. And by the time we get to next year or before, when we have to go to voters with the bigger package, we could go with the whole thing.
Yep.
With all of it at one time. So, and that's well within the 3-year limit.
Right.
But I think we should make Haskell understand that we're not doing the 3 years because we want 3 years. And, you know, and somehow craft it such that with input, that we can, and I suspect Dave, Mike, I suspect he'll go for that.
I'm excited that this guy, you guys have the opportunity to pull this guy in because he's a good guy and you're getting a really good number. And, you know, in this day and age, you don't see that too often.
Right.
Yeah, this guy's hungry for it, and he knows the business, he knows the work, and he's just as excited as we are, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well,
and the faster we can start, I mean, what was really clear to me from those numbers is that we start saving money immediately. So I don't know if we need what kind of a motion we need, but my opinion would be that we try to direct management to get things started as quickly as possible and to work with whichever attorney or committee makes sense to figure out make sure that we're doing that in a legal way. But
I think the motion would be to approve Haskell as our respected hauler, to immediately begin discussions on a contract with him for a start of no less than 3 years, to start date as soon as possible. We can work all that stuff in there with input from, you know, it could be the governance or attorney, somebody that says how we craft it to make it read like a long-term contract. That's the intent. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, you might want to also take the RFP. That has a lot. It's basically the contract.
Right.
So you could work off of that.
Okay, let's
so moved.
So
Was that good enough or?
No, that's fine.
Second.
Okay, any more discussion? But the only discussion I have is, yeah, we should get that RFP to a few of us, to Deborah and a few of us, to make sure we have it as a backdrop. Mike, you already have them, to start thinking about crafting this document. And if we need some legal input, we can get it as we move forward. But I would agree that if you could start this guy tomorrow, I would do it. Anyway, you can.
Yes, send me that if you would, and I'll
We'll do that. Any other discussion? Not seeing. Roll call vote. Allison.
Aye.
Wendy.
Abstain.
Okay. Denise.
Aye.
Mike Brown.
Aye.
Deborah.
Aye.
David.
Aye.
And Kern.
Aye.
And Bob, I also. Thank you very, very much, and good job, guys. And FYI, into next month, just as a forewarning, we'll be discussing in the June meeting some of the data that we're beginning to accumulate on the longer-term decision regarding Eco-Maine and the other alternatives. So just we'll be crafting some of that for a presentation discussion in the next board meeting. With that, we have just I believe the last item, let me check, which would be any discussion on financials or input from the Finance Committee. Allison, we talked, we're getting to the end of the fiscal year, by next time, June, whatever our next date is, Beth, Well, is there some way we can get an idea of what we think is lurking in the wood pile financially that we're gonna have to pay?
Depends if we have another waste. Are we gonna have another wastewater bill this year, this fiscal year, Beth? Or,
I would think so.
she's muted, but
I looked at that and I want to say I don't believe so because I think it rolls into next year.
Oh,
I think we've had 4, but I'll double check that tomorrow. You know, sometimes we won't get it till after June. We don't get it till July or August. And I think over the years we've paid, you know, the first bill we paid this year was actually for last year. So
yeah, I
I'll
guess,
double check on that, but
thanks.
wastewater is like the big one that,
Yeah.
we don't get that many more big things. There are a few things that are just like we haven't paid yet. Like there's the $25,000 transfer to the landfill closure.
Yellow bags?
I don't,
yes, we have yellow bags are going to show up anywhere in the next couple of weeks. So but they're just large. So it's probably going to be, I want to say between $18,000 and $20,000. So that line will be spent pretty much.
and then we've got a few of those things that we talked about, plus another $9,000.
No, it's just,
But you know, we have that 70,000 that we didn't spend on the trailer, which is kind of funny that now this other guy has to buy a trailer. But so hopefully we're gonna be okay.
Haggerty is a big bill coming in. Haggerty was for the well, we pre-approved it, but I think it's hanging out there. He just hasn't invoiced us.
yeah, between Mike and all I'm pointing at is if in June we had some kind of a swag and where we thought we were at, just total picture, not so much the individual accounts. It'd be nice. It still looks like we're slightly ahead of the curve and ahead of budget at this point. But, you know, is there something lurking that we don't know about, the rest of us on the board, that's going to hit us in the back of the head? And I think we have a couple of things we mentioned, but they don't sound huge. Mindy.
I just have a question. Looking at these financials that you're saying, page 1 and 2, the red lines are indeed over expended. Am I correct?
Yes.
The red, okay. So has anyone got a total yet of the lines? I don't see it. Oh, wait a minute.
The very
Yeah,
top.
it is.
I don't see it in red anywhere to recognize.
Well, are you talking about the total picture?
Well, the total 2-page summary report of the lines that are in red, where we have over expended. Do we
Yeah, I
know?
mean, the total isn't in red, but we're not at the end of the year yet.
No.
And the revenue is, you know, we're not in obvious chaos yet, but
No, in total, if this helps at all, we're at $1.8 million worth of expenses, and we're at almost $2 million of revenue income. So in general terms, we're $150,000 to $200,000 in the black. Does that make sense, Mindy?
It does. The last time we met, as we talked about those expenditures that were still waiting to be
Yep.
calculated and all, it was really feeling differently than that.
Okay, well,
So,
well, we've got Eco Maine sends us bills, and
right,
I would caution us against looking at it like that, because I mean, we just haven't paid ourselves $25,000 that we're supposed to pay ourselves.
right. No, I agree. That's what I was driving at. If we look at $150,000, $200,000 in the black, that's not what we're going to realize at the end of the year. Now, that number potentially 50,000, 0? We should take a look at that as an overall number for the June meeting. We should have a good idea of it by then. And what's lurking. That's where I was driving at.
Okay, next meeting. Great.
Yeah. Any other questions on the financials?
We do have the bulldozer payment lurking, I believe, too, but I'm not,
Yeah, I don't know about that one.
might have been October.
But we should
I'll double check.
Beth, if you have a list of any of the big ticket items they're going to hit by the end of the year, why don't you give it to Allison?
Okay.
So she has a summary and we'll know more at the end of June. And the June meeting is when, Beth, do you recall?
It was June 27. What did I write in the minutes? Sorry, Bob.
we really also need to be looking at, and I guess this is maybe something the finance committee should look at for the next meeting, but our budget for the coming fiscal year is based off of the assumption that we will be raising fees for bags. So
Yeah,
we could look at
June 24th.
doing that, and we should also probably look at whether it makes sense to once again raise landfill fees, because we did not take a significant hit at all in volume when we in tonnage when we raised those fees before. And it may vary, especially given all of our landfill costs. It's probably a conversation we should have.
I agree. I think we should put the rate schedule on the June meeting.
That would make sense. Yeah.
Right? So Beth will make a note too on the June agenda. We'll have our rate setting agenda item for the next fiscal year.
Okay.
That's well.
Any other comments? Motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Oh,
All's in favor or not? Mike?
Yes?
No.
Deborah?
Yes.
Denise?
Yes.
Wendy?
me? Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
Mr. Kern?
Yes.
And David Barrows?
Yes.
And Bob, unanimous. Thank you very much, and great job, everybody. It was a very productive discussion.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Saving money.
Good to see everybody.
Good job, Mike.
We'll see ya.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
Stay safe, guys. Enjoy the weather.
Yeah, enjoy the weather is right.
Wait, I have to figure out how to download this.
Download what?
Oh, I'm been distracted this whole time, perturbed by the fact that I wasn't able to live stream on the town.
You know, you're such an expert here. I can't help you. I wish I could.
Oh no, I just like to. So now I was just saying. Now I have to figure out how to. That was what you heard me saying.
Oh.
And then you said you have to figure out how to what? And so I was saying, I have to figure out how to. Actually, I might as well stop the recording now. So.
Probably a good idea. That's probably a good idea.
Stop iCloud recording. Yes, I'm sending you a email notification when the cloud recording is ready.